Getting traction for a new business might be the hardest part of entrepreneurship. Sure, there's a whole slew of things you need to get done when you're first starting out, but if you never get any sort of traction with your new business, the rest just doesn't matter. And the part that I've struggled with the most in this is that it seems like a lot of founders and new business owners just don't talk about how they got or get traction out of the gates with their new business. I've always imagined it that you have to be the sleazy car salesman to get your first traction with a new business. And what I've learned is that that's just not the case. There's actually a whole slew of traction channels to get started with a new business so you can make it successful. According to Gabriel Weinberg and Justin Mars, the author of Traction, there are 19 different ways to get traction. So in this video, we're going to cover those 19 different traction channels and cover why you should read their book, Traction, if you're struggling to get traction in those early customers for your new business. To give you some background on this book, Gabriel Weinberg and Justin Mars aren't just some academics who wrote a research paper on how startups get their first traction. No, both of them are entrepreneurs themselves and have firsthand experience of what it takes to get traction with a new business. Gabriel Weinberg is the founder and CEO of DuckDuckGo, that privacy-centered search engine that competes with Google, and you've probably seen their ads either through the radio or even on billboards. Justin Mars is a serial entrepreneur who started at least 2 companies and has exited from 1. So both know what it takes to get a business off the ground and keep it going at a high level. And both of them seem to do this through one main concept that they talk about in their book, Traction, and that is the concept of the Bullseye Method. I like to think of the Bullseye Method as the scientific method approach to getting traction for a new business. First, you start with creating ideas for each of the 19 different traction channels. Yes, each of the 19 traction channels. So it's a lot of ideas and it's a lot of hard work, but getting traction is a lot harder than just that. Now, once you have all those different ideas on paper, what you need to do is narrow down to your top 3 ideas. And I love this a lot because it's ideation with lanes. It gives you enough of a structure for ideation so you can ideate at a high level. With your top 3 ideas, you run experiments at the same time to see whether or not these traction channels are valid or not. This typically takes anywhere from 30 to 90 days, and how much volume you can run through these experiments depends on your budget. The more important part, though, is that you create a standardized KPI and benchmarks so you can compare these 3 different traction channels to see how they rank against one another. After you've run all 3 experiments, you have to determine whether or not those traction channels worked or not. Now, if all 3 of those experiments didn't work, that can mean 2 things. 1, maybe your business just isn't solving a real problem just yet. Or 2, that those traction channels aren't actually the right fit for your business right now. And the nice thing about this Bullseye Method is that you already have a whole slew of ideas from the previous step that you can go back to. You can iterate on those ideas based on the learnings of your previous experiments and run a whole set of experiments, a new set of experiments again. And the ultimate goal with the Bullseye Method is to get down to one traction channel that your business focuses on, because if your business stays focused, that increases the probability of its success. Now, as the author has mentioned, your business probably won't rely on this particular traction channel for its entire lifetime. Could it? Sure. But more than likely, it'll use this traction channel maybe for a little while, maybe a few years, and then have to move on to a different traction channel because the world changes and your business needs to adapt to those changes. The nice thing about the Bullseye Method, though, is that the Bullseye Method works for existing businesses as well. So when you need to change your traction channel, you can just run this same process to find your new traction channel. The last thing I love about this book is that it's one of the most practical books I've ever read when it comes to entrepreneurship. There's not much, if any, fluff in it. It's straight to the point and it packs a punch. Each traction channel had me thinking of all sorts of ideas, even ones I never even considered before. And the examples that they used for demonstrating these different traction channels were real practical examples. They weren't just case studies that had more of an academic flavor and were irrelevant. No, each of these examples were relevant and were really helpful to really understanding how these tracking channels work and how you can implement some of the best practices for those tracking channels within your own business. This book, honestly, is probably the best resource when it comes to finding traction for your business. As someone who has a STEM mindset and background, this Bullseye Method really hit home because it is essentially the scientific method approach to getting traction with a new business. And the other nice thing is that if you're using the business model of Canvas, the Bullseye Method and these traction channels coordinate with that incredibly well. Overall, this book is one that I recommend almost on a weekly basis to aspiring and early stage entrepreneurs because it is the best resource when it comes to figuring out how to get traction for a new business. So if you want to get your own copy of the book Traction, you can check it out by going to the link below.